Hi, this is Trevor with Maker Experiment, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. I've been using Epilog machinery since about 2013, and for the last 12 years, I've used mine for a variety of projects. I've used it for doing print and cut activities such as keychains. I've done engraved items such as cutting boards and tumblers, and I've also used it for doing vector cut projects like custom boxes that I've designed, as well as custom signage. When I'm creating signage projects, they usually fall into one of two buckets. The first bucket is a sign that I've designed and created myself, that I then try to market and sell to my customers. The other bucket is one where my customers have a design in mind that they actually commission me to make. Most often, these include small business signs of logos. In this webinar, I'm going to touch on tips and tricks for both avenues, but I'm also going to add a couple of customer-specific things that will help you when it comes to design, communicating that to your customers, and then a few tips and tricks of how to handle the communication. Over the course of this webinar, we're going to discuss a variety of topics. We're going to talk about materials that I've used for both indoor and outdoor signage, adhesives that I've used for both wood and acrylic. We're going to talk about paints that are great for covering up those laser cut edges, but also adding color to your design. We're going to talk about hanging methods, lighting methods, and then we're going to cover some of those tips and tricks that you're going to need for assembly. Along with that, I'm going to add in a few tips and tricks about working with those custom clients to make that process as smooth as possible. So let's get started and talk about materials. When I got started in my sign making journey, I wanted to find a material that I could use that I wasn't afraid to mess up on. Now, when I talk about this, it meant it needed to be cheap, because I didn't want to go out and screw up tens, maybe even hundreds of dollars working on a material without knowing exactly what I was going to be doing. That led me to using MDF. MDF has been a great material for not only trying out new things, but just learning in general. So if you're getting started and you have never made a sign before in your life, or haven't even vector cut anything in your life on a laser, I would suggest starting with MDF just to figure out how to design for your signage style. This has helped me, frankly, throw out a lot of pieces, but not a lot of money. Now, one of the things that MDF is great for is being cheap. The downside of MDF is that it's not great with water or moisture. So if you live in a very humid environment and you want to put something outside, or you live somewhere where you get a lot of rain and you want to put it outside, MDF is probably not your best choice. That being said, if you want to use it for indoor signage, it has been great for that. Just to show you an example, I made a sign back in about 2013 time range when I created my first ever logo for my business. Now, this logo has gone through probably 26 iterations since then. And earlier on, I really liked that logo that I came up with. So I wanted to make a sign of it, partly for the nostalgic reasons of being able to have it in the future, and partly because I wanted to put it in my videos. And this is the sign that I created. Now, I was limited on the size of my bed at the time, and I didn't know any better on how to make a bigger sign on a smaller bed. So this one is about 12 inches in diameter, and it has a stacked element. So if I go in here, you'll see that there's different layers that are all MDF. And I've learned a lot since then, because you'll see I didn't do a great job of covering up the laser cut edges on any of my pieces. A lot of what I've done has come with time, learning, experimenting, and just trying out new things. So if your first one doesn't look that good, don't be afraid. Mine didn't either. Now, with this example, this sign has been through 3 different states. It's been through 4 or 5 different moves, and it's still hanging in there. Now, it's got a couple nicks and dings, frankly, that I caused by moving, but it's still intact it still holds up, and I still put it on display in my shop because I think it's important to remember where I started from. This all to say that even though MDF is cheap and you might hear a lot of bad things about it, if you're using it for indoor signage and just using it for your shop or customer signs that are indoors, it will be a great fit. Now, it has some complexities that you need to deal with, but I think it's a great first material to get started with. Once you've learned how to work with MDF and you've learned your signage style and you've learned how to do what you want to do, I highly recommend acrylic. Now, acrylic is very, I would say, easy to work with, and it's very quick to work with. Now, acrylic comes in limited colors, so that is one of the challenges that you're going to run into. See, with MDF, I use a lot of paints to try to cover up the material and make them whatever color I want. You can do the same thing with acrylic. So if you're going to buy acrylic and you want to buy one thing of acrylic, maybe using clear or white acrylic is going to be your best bet. Now, the advantage of using acrylic over MDF is the processing time. When I work with MDF and I want to paint the design, I am going to spend hours and days going through the painting process because the paint and how you do it makes all the difference in how it is represented to your customer. If you hurry up on the painting process or you skip steps and you try to rush it, it's going to be very obvious. Ask me how I know. I've had signs where the paint peeled off. I've had signs where I got all the way to the end and I tried to rush that last little bit and ended up messing up days of work and had to start all over. So while a quality MDF sign might take me 5 or 6 days to make between sanding and painting and everything else that's involved, I can make an acrylic sign from start to finish in less than a day. Sometimes even less than an hour, depending on the complexity of the sign. So if you're talking about trying to get the most amount of signs through your business, acrylic is a great way to do that. Now, acrylic comes in 2 main types, cast and extruded. So there are differences depending on what you want to do. If you want to engrave the acrylic and get that nice frosty white look, you're going to need to use cast acrylic. If the engraving doesn't matter and you're not going to be doing that and you just want to laser cut it, I would recommend using extruded acrylic. Now, depending on which type you choose, your color options may be limited, as I mentioned. And that's one of the biggest struggles you're going to have when it comes to these acrylics. Now, over the years, I've definitely seen them gain more colors and more variety. In the past, I have had clients that had a very specific taste in mind when it came to the type of acrylic that they wanted. Now, sometimes this can be difficult to help with, and your options are still going to be limited. But I did find an acrylic supplier that would make a custom acrylic for me. In this case, I went with Rowmark, and this is the piece of acrylic that I had made. And I have been carrying this around for the last 10 years because the cost of this acrylic was not cheap. So, this is the acrylic. It is a multiply acrylic that is white, orange, and then it actually has a pattern over the top of it. My client wanted something that they could engrave to see the white parts of it, but they also wanted that little film on top that showed the texture. So just know that you can get some custom acrylics made, but they typically cost, I would say, at least 5 times what an off-the-shelf acrylic would cost you. Another option to look at if you need a custom acrylic or custom color that you can't find on the market but you really want to use acrylic, or your client really wants acrylic to be in their design, you can look into options like UV printing where you can add just about any custom color you want to your material. And I will show you an example later in this webinar of where I've done just that. When you are looking into materials, I highly suggest that you try to buy your materials in bulk, because that's how you're going to save the most amount of money. Now, there are a lot of great suppliers for acrylic. as well as other materials. One of the things that I found is that if you're doing small sheets and you only need a little bit, they are great options for that stuff. If you want to buy full sheets of acrylic, where you're talking about your black colors, the white colors, and the solid colors that you use all the time, buying those as one-off sheets for the size of your bed is not the most economical way to do it. I would look into wholesale suppliers. One of the ones that I've actually used in the past is Joycast acrylics. I've also used Piedmont Plastics because both of them have allowed me to get larger sheets and they will cut it down for me. And I just go and pick it up, and then that way I can get exactly what I need for about half the cost of buying it at retail. Now, a good example of this is I used to buy my 12-inch by 24-inch sheets of 1/4-inch black acrylic from an online store that would ship it to me. I'd say that my average cost was between $15 and $18 per sheet once it arrived at my house. When I went through the wholesaler and I actually got them to cut it down to 12 by 24 for me, even with the cutting fee, my total came down to about $9 to $10 per sheet after all of those fees. So quite a bit less than if I were to buy it retail. And that's how you're going to make this successful as a business, is by trying to find out where you can buy your materials in bulk. You may have to store them for a while, but I found that I've been able to do one sign for somebody and then have material for the next 5 signs in a row because I bought that material in bulk, and I actually ended up spending way less than I would have if I had bought it each time I had to make a sign. So keep that in mind when you're on your journey, that buying your materials in bulk is a great option for saving money for your business. When it comes to painting your materials, it's very important to make sure that you have a quality primer and a quality paint. If you don't do that, you're not going to get the results you're looking for. Now, it's very easy to go to a big box store and get one of their primers and paints, or even one that might be a primer and paint in one. Now, those are not ones that I would recommend, but I want to point you to 2 that I found to be very successful in what I'm doing, especially if you're trying to cover up those laser cut edges. The first one is the primer. So for mine, I use an automotive primer. So it's actually a fillable and sandable primer. This one is a Rust-Oleum one. The thing that I like about this primer is that it will actually fill in the voids and the gaps and the inconsistencies in the surface of the material so that you get a nice smooth finish. Of course, you'll have to sand it and then probably apply a second coat in order to get that, especially if you want to cover up those laser cut edges. But I have found that it does a great job of covering the edges, and I will show you that here in a second. Once you have the primer set, I like to use a paint that I typically have to order online, and that paint is the MTN 94. The reason that I like this paint is that this is actually made more for graffiti artists and painting on buildings and doing murals and things like that. So it sprays on very smoothly and it covers very well. I have compared this paint to probably 5 or 6 other different kinds of paint and against big box store paints, and found that this one sprays very consistently. The coverage is very consistent. It doesn't seem to matter how I do with shaking up the can or anything like that. I always get a very consistent finish with this. So I would highly recommend that you get a fillable primer, and I would also recommend the MTN 94 paint. You can use other paints and it will still get the job done, but I have found that this has been much more efficient. I don't waste as much time, and I haven't had any issues when it comes to the finish when I'm painting. If you want to do more intricate paint and you need to do fine lines or things like that, that is where paint markers come in. And the ones that I use are actually the Posca paint markers. So POSCA right here. These, I'm typically using, this one's the medium, or the PC-5M size. It has a nub tip that is about the size of a Sharpie, I would say. So I've found that these are very useful when it comes to paint filling engravings and making sure that you're actually getting some color. You can also vector cut the mask, peel the mask away, and then paint with these paint markers. I've done it on both acrylic and I've done it on wood, and they work very well. So if you're trying to paint something, again, make sure you use a primer, a paint, and then if you want paint markers, that's an option as well. I have tried probably 7 or 8 different primers. I've tried shellac, I've tried the Rust-Oleum primer, I've tried, let's see, probably 5 or 6 others that you can all find at the big box stores, but the fillable primer is the one I found to be most useful. So what I want to show you is an example of that. This is the original laser cut letter. So I cut all of them at the same time. You can see the edges are very dark. I tried to make sure it was as dark as I could get it for this video. And around, you have that dark everywhere. Next, this is the primered letter. This has the fillable sanded primer. It's nice and smooth. It coated everything on the edges. It's all gray now. No black is left showing. And it even covers in those nooks and crannies. Now there's some tricks to this where you want to make sure that you spray at an angle and you're trying to do light spraying back and forth in order to hit that. But this is the kind of coverage that primer does. And then to show you the MTN94 paint, this is the final letter that was painted. So nice smooth finish. Edges are fully covered. If I can get it to focus here. There we go. Nice, smooth. Color is covered. I just didn't spray the back. But that is how most, or rather, that is how all of the stuff that I do typically turns out. There's always the occasional one that I personally mess up, but that paint and primer combo, no matter which color of paint you're using, performs extremely well. So highly recommend those. If you're trying to get into painting your materials, give those a look. You will not be disappointed. And I should add this because I just found it when I was looking for some other stuff. But if you want to stain a sign backer or something like that that's plywood, I actually use this traditional Chinese ink. If I can get, there we go. So this one is Yasutomo traditional Chinese ink. I have found that this works really well as a stain of sorts, where you can rub it onto the wood and it will dye it really black. So if you want to do something with a black backer or a black piece and it's wood that will absorb it, this is a great option. When it comes to adhesives for your sign, it's going to depend on the material that you are using. One of the popular ones for wood signs is a wood glue. You can find that with Gorilla Glue or Titebond. I like to use Titebond 2 typically if I'm using a wood glue. There's a trick when you're using wood glue that wood glue takes some time to set. So if you're trying to glue a piece down and you don't want it to move, you can use that in combination with CA glue, such as Starbond here, where you can put a couple of drops of the CA glue with that wood glue, and this will bond within probably 15 to 20 seconds, and it will hold it in place while it gives it time for the wood glue to cure. I've also used the CA glue just by itself to coat and cover pieces and get them to secure signs together. I typically only use this for MDF. So if you're using wood or plywood, I've used it for that too. The CA glue is a great option for doing the wood signage. If you are doing an acrylic sign, and you're building frames for acrylic signs or things like that, that is when you want an acrylic solvent. So this one is Weld On 4. It comes typically with a syringe like this. You might have to buy it separately, but this is for bonding acrylic to acrylic. It's not a glue like you would think of a wood glue where it's bonding the two pieces with a layer of glue. You are actually fusing the acrylic together. So this is called Weld On because what it's actually doing is it's fusing the joint that you're making with the two pieces of acrylic, and it's actually kind of melting that acrylic and then rebonding it back together. So it's a much stronger bond for that. I have found that this, if you're trying to use this with mirror acrylic, it will eat away at that layer for the mirror. So it typically doesn't give you the type of results that you're going to want. There's also a side grip 16 one that will do pretty much the same thing as this one, but it doesn't quite weld it. It's a little bit thicker and it goes on a lot thicker. This is more like, it'll look like water when it's coming out. Make sure you are using precautions, a mask, because the smell of this one is kind of potent and you don't want to be just dealing with that without some kind of protection. Now, if you are doing acrylic to acrylic signage that are, flat piece to flat piece, or you're bonding acrylic to wood, I've actually found that using an acrylic tape or an adhesive tape is very useful for that. I have two that I use in my shop. One is more for indoor use because it's more of a cost-effective method. And then the other one's for outdoor use. It is quite a bit more expensive, but it can hold up to the elements. So the first one is dual tight. So this whole roll, which is 12-inch wide roll, I think is around $80 or $90. It will last you quite a while. I've done probably 5 or 6 signs with this already, and I haven't even made a dent. This one, what you do is you peel off the masking on your acrylic. You will lay this down and then smooth it out with a squeegee or something similar to get all the air bubbles out. And then it's a peel and stick. So you can cut an acrylic sign, peel the piece, stick it, and you're done. It is a pressure sensitive type of adhesive, so make sure you're pressing it down really well. But it makes signage super fast to assemble when you are using an adhesive tape. The next one that I use, and this is for outdoor use, is the 467 MP. So same thing, 12-inch roll. It is also going to last you quite a bit of time. This one is quite a bit more expensive. I think this one was in the $300 to $400 range. It is meant for both indoor and outdoor use, so it can hold up to the elements. I have used this on projects for both indoor and outdoor. The clients I've had that use it for outdoor have said that it has held up well. So that's the big difference between these two, is that one's meant more for that indoor use and then one is meant more for outdoor. So I tend to use the dual tight for all the indoor stuff, and then I use the 3M for the outdoor stuff. This one does seem to be a bit thinner of a film than the dual tight. So some of it's also personal preference and what you like using the most. If you're going to be doing stuff with mirror acrylic or like a translucent acrylic, you want to make sure that you're testing it on a piece before you just go cutting a bunch of signs. I have tried multiple adhesives on mirror acrylic and found that the tape definitely works the best. I've also used it on translucent. You can kind of see a film a little bit through some of the translucents, but it also gives it a neat effect when you do that. So it's really more of a personal preference on that one. But that gives you a few ideas for adhesives that you can use for both wood and acrylic materials. When it comes to hanging your signs, there are a ton of options for making that happen. And you deal with this stuff every day, whether you're hanging pictures or you're hanging decor in your home. you'll see these all around. So one of them that I tend to use more for wood signs that I can actually screw these into is a French cleat system. So there's typically two parts. One is going to get screwed into the wall, the other will get screwed onto the back of the sign, and then when it goes up, it basically links into that piece on the wall and it will secure it that way. These are a little bit more difficult to use on an acrylic sign without the proper type of adhesive, because you can't just glue these on with an acrylic adhesive because it will not work with the metal. So sometimes I've seen people use VHB tape from 3M. I've seen them use a silicone to actually glue them on. It just depends on what you want to do and the type of hanger that you want to use. Moving on from that one, because that one I use more for wood applications, there are a few for acrylic. One of them, which is very popular, is the standoff. So this is, and you can get them in different diameters, but this is a standoff where you unscrew the cap and you have the base of it that gets screwed to the wall. There's actually a hole in it to where you put the screw through. There is a plastic washer that will go against the base. So like that. You will then have another plastic washer on this side, and this is the cap that will screw into it. So you want to make sure that those plastic washers are actually on either side of your acrylic so that it doesn't scratch your acrylic. Those are meant to protect the acrylic surface. So what you would do is put this through the hole in the acrylic. You're typically designing, I believe it's to a 5/8 inch diameter, but I typically measure it with a dial caliper. And then you'll just put it through the acrylic and then screw it into place and then secure it to the wall. And then it will look like this, obviously with acrylic in it. And your front of your sign will show these silver diameter pieces. So if you like that look, this is a great option. If you do not like that look and you want something that's hidden, there are a couple of options as well. One of those options is a snap tight fitting. So these I get from MBS standoffs. This is the part that screws into the wall, same thing. There is a hole in the bottom. Then you actually use weld on to adhere this acrylic pad to your acrylic sign. And it will actually bond it just like you were trying to glue acrylic to acrylic. So this will be a permanent bond. Once you're actually have these attached to your sign, you'll take your sign and you'll press it against the wall and it will make little imprints because there's a tiny little triangular piece at the top, which isn't going to show on the camera, that will put a mark on the wall. The downside to these is that depending on the size, you need at least one for typically every half of a pound. So if you have a sign that weighs, 6 pounds, you're gonna have to have about 12 of these to make that happen. And that's a lot of holes you gotta drill in the wall. If your sign doesn't weigh a lot, these are a great option because you might only need 2. But at the end, what you would do is hover it up to your pieces on the wall, and then it just goes and clicks into place, and it will secure your sign to the wall. This one that I have here, that's my logo, is actually held up by these. There's about 4 of them on that sign. So that's what I use to hang that one up. If you do not want to have that many holes in the wall, another option is to use a frame on the back, or you could use a French cleat on the back, but the frame helps make it more even. So basically you take a frame, you might have to make the frame yourself, make it as a French cleat frame, and you then glue that whole frame to the back of your acrylic sign using either the VHB tape, which you have to have a certain amount of tape per inch to cover the weight, Or you can do like silicone and glue it on, and then it will act just like a French cleat would, and you only need to put the French cleat hanger into the wall. So a lot less holes to go with that method, and it would be completely hidden. So again, just depends on what you want to do. Same thing applies here. If you want to glue these snap tights to the back of, say, a mirror acrylic piece, this adhesive for the weld-on will eat away at that. So you will not be able to glue that to mirror acrylic straight away because it can cause some problems. So be very careful with your adhesives. Make sure to test them on a scrap piece or something like that to know how it's going to interact with your material. Another way to make your signage stand out is to add lighting to it. There are a lot of ways that you can do this. Some of the ones that I've used and are common are little light rings that go around standoffs that will shine through an engraving. They also make LED strips that you can attach to the back of a sign for backlighting. I've also made signs where I attach those same LED strips on the inside of a frame and have that shine through the acrylic. There's also the type that's a neon look to give you the neon sign look, but it's flexible LEDs. And I'm sure there are many, many more. Some of the ones that I like to use are LED strips. So something like this, where it has the LED strips. This one is actually for outdoor signage. It's got a waterproof cover over the LEDs. You simply cut on the copper, solder them together, and then you can do all types of things with the signage. Soldering, if you haven't done it before, is super easy to do. There are many videos out there, so don't let that intimidate you from trying out something like this for a simple backlit sign. Another one that I personally haven't used yet, but I'm planning to do is the flexible neon type sign. So this is one where you can actually take it and rope it around a design. You'll typically see this with names, or I've seen it with wedding signage, things like that, where you can light up just those strips and not do it as a backlit. So it looks more like the old neon signs. A couple tips if you want to use lighting in your designs. If you want to backlight acrylic, you need to make sure that your acrylic will actually transmit that light through it and not just have it stop. Clear acrylic, it's going to be difficult to get a nice kind of diffused look because the LEDs typically look like bright spots with that. I usually use a white acrylic that is rated for UV lighting and backlighting, and you'll actually get a nice diffused look in it. You'll actually want it to be fairly thick of a frame, typically at least 2 to 3 inches, where the LEDs are going to be spaced, about this far off of your acrylic in order to give it time to spread and get through the acrylic itself. If you have them too close, you can end up with hot spots to where parts of your sign are lit and then other parts are very dark. So you want to make sure that you try to diffuse it as much as possible. If you are limited with how much spacing you can do, another trick that you can do is actually use aluminum tape. You can put this on the inside of your frame and actually have it coating the inside of the frame, and the light will bounce off of the aluminum and go back out through the front of the sign. If you do something like painting it black, it will actually absorb the light in the frame and have trouble getting out of the frame. So I highly recommend using an aluminum tape if you're going to backlight acrylic. Now that we've talked about backlighting, I want to talk a little bit about the assembly process. I have seen about 3 different processes. 2 of them I actually use myself, and 1 of them I prefer the most. The first one is manual measurement. I've seen this a lot with some larger signage where people will use a ruler, measure things out, and then align everything using measurements. I find that way is tedious, it's not always accurate, and it's not very repeatable. it will take you a lot longer to do it that way than the other methods that I'm going to discuss. The second method is to vector score the material that's going to be your backer, and then actually have everything aligned to that vector scoring. This does allow for more repeatability, and I'm going to show a couple of clips here where you can actually vector score everything with the current job, peel away the masking if you have a masking on it, and then simply glue or peel and stick with the tape everything in place according to where the vector scoring lines are. The important thing about this method is if you want to make sure those lines don't show, you're going to have to offset them in just a little bit to make sure that the vector part of it gets covered by the piece that you're trying to glue down. If you don't offset it inward, sometimes you can see that vector scoring, because remember, there's a kerf to your laser, and when you cut something, if you have it at 2 inches wide, it will be slightly less than 2 inches wide because of the kerf. So if your vector score is at that 2-inch mark, it will typically show. You're going to want to offset that in. The other method, which is probably my favorite method, is to use more of a stencil method. This is where I take materials such as hardboard or a piece of cardboard from a box, and I will vector cut the outline of my design to where it has spaces for all of my pieces to go. This is honestly, in my mind, one of the easiest methods to assembling your sign. You simply lay it over the backer. You will then secure it down, whether that's with tape or some kind of clamp, and then you simply start putting all of your elements into that stencil, and when you're all done and everything is glued down, that stencil comes right up and you have your sign with everything perfectly placed. If you are doing production runs of a sign and you're going to be doing the same design multiple times, I highly recommend using the stencil method, because it's less machining time overall, because you're only cutting that layout stencil one time. You're not vector scoring it every single time. So it saves you machine time. It also saves you unmasking time. So the stencil method I highly recommend. Even though it takes extra material, sometimes you can actually cut the stencil while you're cutting your other material, and it will be less time overall. But the most important thing is that it is highly repeatable. Having talked through how to actually make the sign and some of the things that you can do to stand out, I want to talk a little bit about the business side of sign making and actually selling them to customers. The first option is you make your own signs and your own designs, and you just try to post them out there or take them to markets and you sell a design that you came up with yourself. The other option is doing completely custom work, where you are taking someone else's design and then making the sign for them and selling it to them. This is often very popular with small businesses and logos. Be careful that you do not do any copyright infringed material. You don't want to get in trouble for that kind of stuff. But what I want to talk about is more of the business side and the way that I approach doing custom work. The first thing that comes to mind when doing a custom sign is the inputs that you get from the client in order to be able to price the sign. Normally, when I do this, I have a form set up on my website, and I encourage you to do the same, where it will collect information such as their shipping address, the actual file for their design, and then a little bit of information on the size and the features that they're looking for. When they do the design side, I highly recommend that you require or get a vector file for the design. It will save you a ton of time when it comes to doing the actual sign work. Now, do not let that deter you if you don't get a vector file. If they want to send you a JPEG or a PNG, it is still perfectly possible to make a really nice sign with those as well. But you want to make sure that you charge for the design time that it's going to take you to make it into a vector file, or outsource it in order to get someone else to make the vector file for you. Just make sure that you are accounting for that when it comes to your pricing. The file design with vectors makes the design process so much easier to get it to your laser and start making it, as well as working up the mock-ups for the quote and everything like that. Typically, when I'm quoting a sign design, I have my own spreadsheet that I've developed that accounts for my material, shipping, the labor, my machinery, even the electricity that I'm going to be using as part of the machining time. I make sure that all of my overhead is covered, all of my design fees are covered and things like that, so that I know how much it's going to take to actually make the sign, and then what my profit margin that I ideally would like in order to make it profitable for me to do that. And that's where you can change your profit margin a little bit, or buy materials in bulk to be able to adjust what that price is going to be to your end customer to make sure that you are competitive in the marketplace. But I really recommend that you do not fight to be the cheapest. If people are asking for discounts, I encourage you to stick to what it's actually going to cost you to make and what you should be selling it for, and make sure that you value yourself and your work. There are a lot of people out there that will try to get you to go lower on your price, but make sure you're valuing yourself and don't let anybody else make you think that your work is cheap, because you know your worth, you know how good your work is, and they need to value that as well. When it comes to quoting a sign for your customer, I typically don't do the entire design before I quote it. And what I will do is I say, this is going to be the price for your sign. I will make sure that I do a full design mock-up and get your approval before we move forward in the process. This allows me to not waste a bunch of time designing things and spending all of that effort for them to just say, no, I don't want to move forward. I will do more of a ballpark design idea of what I think will work the best and create menu options for them to choose from. A good example of this is they may say, I'm not sure what size I want, but I want this out of acrylic. I will take their design, mock it up just to see what the sizes would be, and then present them with a essentially small, medium, and large sign option. Think of it kind of like when you go into a coffee shop and you have a small, medium, and large. The small one is typically going to be the smallest I think I can physically make it and have it work out to where the parts will all look nice. It's not going to end up with any cutting problems, and that they will still be happy with the size. And then the larger one might be something like 2 foot by 3 foot or 2 foot by 2 foot, something like that. And then the middle one will be somewhere in between. Another thing that I've done in the past is sometimes I have the client that knows exactly how large they want the sign, but they don't necessarily know the materials or the features. So in those cases, I might say, here's the price for an MDF version, here's the price for an acrylic version, and here's the price if you would like it to have lighting with it. And then I will send them those options and get them to choose one. And once they do, that will kick off the actual process. When I am doing my quotes and I take orders, I personally collect the entire fee up front. This makes sure that I don't end up paying for materials and then they back out of it or anything like that. You could also do it where you take a non-refundable deposit to cover the materials and then you ask for the balance when you go to ship it. It just depends on how you want to work. And we move forward into the design phase. What I like to do is I will typically mock up the sign and I will do clipping masks in Adobe Illustrator with real life images of materials like acrylic or wood, so that they get a better idea of what it's going to look like with the materials or paint colors that they've chosen. I found that I have a lot more success with the final result turning out the way that the mock-up was than if I was just trying to make the color look like it using like an eyedropper or something like that within my design software. I highly suggest that you use real life material images, especially if you're doing a wood material, so that you capture a wood grain look that is natural and is more accurate, so that they're not going to be caught off guard once you actually make the design. When I send them the design mock-ups, I also limit how many revisions I'm willing to do for free. I typically allow for 2 revisions, which limits the response time sometimes, as well as how much they're really willing to change it. Because if you give them unlimited design revisions, they can get really picky about what things are, and it can take a lot more time and effort than what you had quoted in the previous quote. So I limit it to 2 free design revisions, and then anything after that, I would typically charge a design fee to make sure that I cover my time. Once we've agreed on the actual design and they're happy with moving forward, I actually get them to respond in an email or have them fill out a piece of paper that agrees to the design that is pictured. Because I've had people in the past that have said, yes, move forward, and I didn't do that. And then at the end, they said, I didn't agree to this design. It's nothing like what I wanted. Having them agree in writing to the design and what you're going to be making for them is very critical, because it will be something that you can point back to say, no, you did agree, here's the paperwork, and it will help you defend your case. So just, cover yourself, make sure that you take that extra step and get all of the approvals in writing. Once everything is agreed to, that is when I go and I order my materials if I don't already have them on hand. And that's when I will communicate with the customer a lead time for the material to come in and about how long it'll take for their sign to be completed. If there's specialty materials, that can take a little bit longer. If it's stuff that I have on hand, it might be a lot faster. The most important thing that I found is just having open communication with your customers about when they can expect their sign, because you don't want them to be upset that it's taking a lot longer, or be surprised when even you're shorter than that lead time. I find that communicating more often and showing them progress along the way goes a long way to having a happy customer. I've also had customers that will request pictures along the way, which I have no problem doing. And in fact, I've even videoed things and made YouTube videos out of the signs so that they can see how their sign was actually made. That has actually helped me get other clients who have specifically requested that I make a video of their sign being made. And that can also be something you can upcharge for if you want to make a dedicated video for them. So just be creative with your options and what you're doing, because you never know what the customer will be looking for and what might stand out to them. When you go to actually make your sign, I typically start prepping all of my materials. I'll put on all the adhesive tapes. I'll get all of my adhesives out. I'll make sure that I have all the material lined up. And then I will make sure that all of the files I need for my laser machining will be stacked up and ready to go. That way, when I'm at the actual machine, I can just go through and keep clicking go, 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 one right after the other, and treat it more like an assembly line and a process line than going back and forth constantly. Because my computer's not right next to my laser, I will typically send over all of the files to the laser at once, and then I'll stay at the laser and cut everything I need to cut, and then I'll take it over to my assembly area, and then I will put everything together. That will save you a lot of time as well as a lot of setup. Once I complete the sign, I will take pictures of it for my client and actually send them to them to say, hey, great news, I've finished up your project. It will be shipping out to you soon. Here's a preview of what to expect. This way, if there's something that you happen to have made a mistake on or have done wrong, which I have done, they will catch it in that image and you have time to fix it before you actually ship it out. If you wait until they get it, sometimes you'll have to get it shipped back, you'll have to fix it and then ship it out again, and it'll be just a waste of time. So I typically say, hey, here's the final images of your sign. I hope you like it. I'm going to ship this out on, say, 2 days from now once I package it up. And then that gives them a little bit of time to bring anything up that might make them either unhappy or they might have caught a mistake, something like that. When it comes to packaging and shipping my signs, I actually use custom cut foam that matches the outline of the sign, and I use a box that will obviously fit that sign. But custom cutting the foam has made it to where the breakages by UPS and FedEx have drastically reduced over time. Early on in my sign making journey, when I just used bubble wrap and the brown paper to package my stuff, it seemed like they were breaking them about 30% of the time. Once I moved over to custom cut foam in layers, and I did a layer of foam, the sign with foam around it, another layer of foam going around the sign, and then the top layer of foam protecting it, I found that that has protected my signs really well. You can also put a piece of board on top and bottom. That will increase your shipping cost, but that can also be a really good method to protecting your signs. But being able to have custom cut packaging also gives a more high-end experience to the client when they receive their sign. Think about how you would want to receive your product. Do you want it to just be shoved in a box with brown paper all around it? Or when you open the box, would you rather see it snugged within custom cut foam? It's got, the design, the paperwork, maybe if you had paperwork with it. I also typically try to make them a keychain of the same design to go in with it, and maybe a couple little extras for free so that you stand out and they will come back to you in the future. In my mind, the experience of them getting the sign is just as important as the design of the sign itself. Make sure that you are taking care of your customer. Make sure that you are putting all of your effort into that product, because they are way more likely to recommend you to others if they have a great experience with you the first time. As we wrap up this webinar, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways. First and foremost, do not be afraid to make mistakes and mess up. As you learn to create different types of signage, you will make mistakes along the way, but don't let that discourage you from moving forward and keep going. I have made a lot of mistakes in my journey to learning how to create different types of signage, and I have found that a lot of my clients have been very patient with me, especially when trying something new, because they seem to be just as willing to let me try something new as I am to wanting to do it in the first place. If you're going to be working on custom work, make sure that you get files that are vector files, because it will save you a lot of headaches and it will save you a lot of time. As the third key takeaway, make sure that you are valuing your time. You don't want to be doing anything for free if you can help it. There might be a time or two that you're doing it for marketing purposes, but make sure that you're actually accounting for all of your time. Don't be afraid to know your worth and make sure that you're quoting that to your customers. There's nothing worse than taking on a project where you have not valued your time and then you end up resenting the project, and you don't want to do that. So make sure that you are valuing your time the whole way through. As tip number 4, make sure that you have everything in writing. That is the way that you're going to be able to communicate clearly with your clients. There's going to be no ambiguity, and therefore no guessing as to what was really agreed upon in the first place. So make sure that you do everything in writing and that they sign off along the way. It will just make the whole process a lot easier. If you have any questions about this webinar, we'd be happy to answer those and give you the best information that we can to help you be successful.